during the Cold War. Not every danger came from missiles or speeches. Many secrets were hidden inside ordinary routines, on quiet streets where no one thought to look twice. This is the story of an ordinary man who unknowingly crossed paths with Soviet espionage simply because he paid attention. If you enjoy real and forgotten Cold War stories, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments. Would you have noticed something out of place? On an overcast autumn morning in late 1958, Washington, D.C. was waking into one of those days that seemed destined to pass without distinction. The city moved slowly, wrapped in damp air and routine, unaware that history often chooses such unremarkable hours to reveal itself. In a quiet residential district not far from embassies and government offices, an ordinary working man began his day exactly as he had hundreds of times before, convinced that predictability was one of life's few reliable comforts. He could not know that before nightfall, a simple act of routine would draw him into the invisible conflict that defined his era. The man was not a soldier, a politician, or an intelligence officer. He was a delivery worker, the kind of person most people barely noticed as he passed through their mornings. His life had been shaped by repetition and responsibility rather than ambition. Each day followed a familiar rhythm: early mornings, carefully stacked bottles, familiar streets, familiar faces. This consistency had carried him through adulthood, through marriage and parenthood, and through years of economic uncertainty. He believed deeply in the value of steady work and the quiet dignity it provided. In his world, attention to detail was not a strategic skill, but a professional habit, learned over decades of serving customers who expected reliability above all else. The neighborhood he served was one of contrasts. Grand houses stood shoulder to shoulder with modest residences, their facades projecting comfort, success, and stability. Diplomats lived beside civil servants, military officers beside academics. It was a place where power often hid behind manners and manicured lawns. To most observers, these streets represented the safest version of American life during a dangerous time. But the Cold War had taught the world that appearances were deceptive, and that the most consequential battles were rarely fought in open view. One particular house on his route had always felt slightly out of step with the rest. Nothing overtly suspicious marked it. There were no loud arguments, no unusual visitors during the day, no obvious signs of secrecy. And yet, it lacked the small imperfections that made other homes feel alive. Curtains never shifted. Windows never revealed glimpses of daily life. Deliveries disappeared with mechanical regularity, without any visible human interaction. These were details so minor that most people would never register them consciously. But for someone whose livelihood depended on noticing patterns, they formed a subtle sense of dissonance. The moment that changed everything was almost laughably small. As he completed his delivery one morning, his foot caught slightly on the edge of a welcome mat. Irritated more than alarmed, he adjusted it, only to notice something embedded beneath. It was a tiny metal component, carefully concealed, connected to something hidden from view. It did not announce itself. It did not explain its purpose. It simply existed where it should not have. In another life, on another day, he might have shrugged and moved on. But habit, more than curiosity, made him pause. Living in Washington during the Cold War meant living with a constant, low-level awareness that the city was more than it appeared. Newspapers were filled with stories of defections, infiltrations, and silent betrayals. The capital was not just the heart of government, it was a focal point of global rivalry. Still, it was one thing to read about espionage, and another to imagine it intersecting with the route of a delivery truck. He told himself he was overthinking, that people installed strange devices for mundane reasons. And yet, the image lingered. Later that day, in a small diner frequented by men whose jobs kept them moving through the city, he mentioned the oddity almost as a joke. He did not dramatize it. He did not claim certainty. He simply described what he had seen. The reaction he received was not what he expected. The listener, a seasoned police detective accustomed to separating noise from signal, did not laugh. He did not dismiss the story. Instead, he asked careful questions and listened in silence. In that silence, the deliverman felt something shift. The thing he had noticed mattered more than he wanted it to. What followed was not an explosion of action, but a slow tightening of awareness. He was not asked to spy, not formally. He was told to do what he had always done. Follow his routine, notice inconsistencies, and speak if something felt wrong. The request was subtle, almost polite, but its implications were heavy. He found himself standing at the edge of a world he had never intended to enter, where information was currency and silence could be dangerous. Over the following days, his ordinary tasks took on an unfamiliar weight. Streets he had traveled for years felt different now, layered with possibilities he had never considered. The house that had first drawn his attention began to reveal more cracks in its facade. The perfection of its exterior, once merely odd, now seemed deliberate. Even the timing of movements, the absence of casual disorder, suggested intention rather than coincidence. He did not need training to recognize that something was being controlled, managed, curated. The most unsettling realization was not what he saw, but what he felt, the sense of being observed. Awareness, once awakened, cuts both ways. He understood now that if he could notice patterns, so could others. The people inside that house were not careless. They were disciplined, methodical, and almost certainly alert to changes in their environment. The thought that his own routine might be under scrutiny introduced a fear he had never known, one that followed him home and sat quietly beside him at night. When direct confirmation finally came, it arrived without drama. No alarms, no public confrontation, just a matter-of-fact explanation from someone who understood the larger picture. The house was under investigation. The occupants were not what they claimed to be. What he had noticed, beginning with that single misplaced detail, had contributed to something far larger than he could have imagined. A network existed where he had seen only a quiet residence. Messages had been sent and received. Information had flowed beneath the surface of ordinary life. Relief came with its own complications. He was told to step back, to return to invisibility while professionals completed their work. For the first time in weeks, he was no longer responsible for watching, remembering, reporting. And yet, detachment was not as easy as it sounded. Once a person understands that history can pass through their daily routine, ignorance becomes a choice rather than a default state. When the arrests eventually occurred, they were swift and controlled. The house was emptied of secrets, its role in the larger conflict quietly erased from public view. Newspapers reported the outcome in neutral language, stripped of human texture. There was no mention of delivery routes or unnoticed details. The story, as far as the world was concerned, had solved itself. Life returned to its familiar shape. Early mornings, cold bottles, familiar streets. But familiarity no longer meant simplicity. He knew now that ordinary environments could serve extraordinary purposes, and that vigilance did not always announce itself with urgency or fear. Sometimes it appeared as professionalism taken seriously, as attention sharpened by experience rather than suspicion. Years passed. The Cold War continued its long, tense arc through history. Alliances shifted, walls rose and fell, and the world slowly transformed. He grew older, his work eventually taking its toll on his body. When he retired, there were no ceremonies, no acknowledgments beyond polite farewells. He left his job the same way he had performed it, quietly, reliably, without spectacle. In later years, as he watched younger generations move through a world shaped by conflicts they barely understood, he sometimes reflected on that morning long ago, not with pride and not with regret, but with clarity. He understood that the most important moment had not been the investigation or the arrests, but the decision to notice something that did not belong, the decision to speak rather than dismiss, the decision to treat attention as responsibility. History often celebrates those who act loudly and visibly, but it depends just as much on those whose contributions never make headlines. People who move through ordinary roles with extraordinary care. People who understand that citizenship is not limited to grand gestures, but expressed through awareness, integrity, and the courage to acknowledge when something is wrong. In the end, the legacy of that quiet deliverman was not the disruption of a spy network, but the reminder that the boundaries between the ordinary and the consequential are thinner than we like to believe. That the safety of a society often rests on individuals who never set out to be heroes, but who choose, in small and decisive moments, to pay attention. The Cold War was shaped not only by weapons, but by quiet vigilance. This story shows that it's not always spies who change history, but ordinary people who refuse to ignore what feels wrong. If you want to keep discovering the hidden secrets of the Cold War, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share in the comments what surprised you most.